At number 26 we have another banger from Demon's Souls. Bang me daddy, it's the Blue-Eye Knight Set. All your modern FromSoft games have their main big scary knight enemies, a couple of which are still to come by the way, and indeed, in Demon's Souls it was your Blue-Eye and Red-Eye knights, the latter of which makes a special appearance in the very first blooming level of Boletaria before appearing in far greater number in the 3rd and 4th levels. To be frank, I would actually have preferred to choose the Red-Eye Knight set as my pick here, and you can get that set. The issue is that it's digital deluxe edition exclusive content. Sure, no problem, here is another £20 extra for a set of goddamn armour. No. As for how to get the Blue-Eye Knight set though, thankfully no farming required. You can kill as many of these ghastly knights as you want, but all they can drop is their weapon, shield, a couple of items or some delicious grass. Rather, you find a piece of their set in each of Boletaria's 4 levels. The single coolest piece, the helm of course, is only acquirable if you've got either pure black or pure white world tendency, allowing you to go through that confounding locked gate at the start of the first level, though make sure to watch for Miranda, or Meralda. You know what, you say Meralda, I say Miranda. The blasted point is that the Blue-Eye Knight set is one of the most iconic armours in Demon's Souls. I don't think it's on the same level as the Black Knight set from Dark Souls 1, the Ring Knights from Dark Souls 3, or the Crucible Knights from Elden Ring, but it's very cool nonetheless. Though let's not forget that a big difference between this set and those 3 I just mentioned is that you couldn't get the Blue-Eye Knight set at all in the original Demon's Souls for PS3. It was strictly a look but don't touch sort of deal, which was quite cruel, because I'm sure that just about everyone who did look wanted to touch, and that's because of the blueness. Helm aside for a minute though, the entire set is quite magnificent, quite incandescent in its colour scheme and detail, with the form of the sun emblazoned all across the greaves, gauntlets and cuirass as proof of their commission from King Doran. The material which the set is made out of is hardened iron, an especially strong though heavy metal processed in Stonefang Tunnel. Another location which was at one point under the control of Boletaria's King Doran. But look, as superb as the armour looks, is it alone enough to propel the Blue-Eyed Knight set high enough in coolness and badassery to earn a privileged place in this pantheon of fine armours? Not quite, but that's where the helm comes in, which is often the case with the most interesting armour sets, many of which look great, but which are substantially elevated by some odd and otherworldly piece of headwear. I honestly think the Blue-Eyed Knight helmet is one of the sickest in all of Soulsborne, not just because of that constant ethereal blue glare, but because of the form of the eye slits. Whereas most helms feature horizontal slits, eye holes, or partially protective facial shielding from which the wearer can see, the face of this helmet gives the effect of it having been clawed by a beast and then imbued with some demonic source of blue soul power to the point where it's not clear that there even is a regular person inside the armour anymore. Sadly, there is a bit of a downside to wearing this set, or at least the helm, which is that it emits this constant low-pitched demonic noise which, although being pretty cool for the first minute, becomes a bit distracting, at least for me. That aside though, hey, pretty damn cool set. Well, we've discussed the armour worn by the big scary enemies from Demon's Souls, and now it's high time we did the same for Dark Souls 1. It's the Black Knight Set. Folks, we all remember our trepidatious early forays through the Undead Burg and the Undead Parish, not quite understanding the game's mechanics, not exactly sure where the hell we were going, and in a constant state of alarm due to all the rats, hollows, crossbow bolts and flaming barrels coming directly our way, because back then, compared to most games many of us had played, enemies hit pretty damn hard. But then you take a turn down these stairs leading to a tunnel where a lone knight stands facing directly away from you, a knight who is far larger, darker and scarier than anything you have seen thus far, a Black Knight. Yes indeed, you encounter Black Knights in key locations all throughout Lordran, always on their own and always posing a challenge, wielding either a Black Knight sword, greatsword, halberd or great axe. Just like with the Blue-Eyed Knight set though, you can hack, slash and slam them all you want, but all they'll drop are a colourful assortment of titanite chunks and occasionally their weapon. After you offer all 4 Lord Souls into the Lord Vessel though, the Kiln of the First Flame becomes accessible, for the first time giving you an inexhaustible supply of Black Knights to farm, and more importantly, their very own set is lying at the end of a scorched walkway. As for Dark Souls 2, no Black Knights or Black Knight armour here, though you can get their weapons. In fact, you can get all their weapons as drops from these dumb monkey things. I have no idea why. As with many things from Dark Souls 1 though, this legendary enemy and their set would make a return for Dark Souls 3, where again they can be found dotted throughout the land, again always on their own, up until you reach the dark version of Firelink Shrine in Untended Graves, where just as in the Kiln of the First Flame, there's a bunch of them, making for a perfect farming spot, because the whole set can't just be easily picked up in this game. The Black Knight set is absolutely one of the edgiest and indeed blackest sets from the entire Dark Souls trilogy, right up there with the likes of the aforementioned Gloom and Rain sets. As dark as it certainly is in character though, it still features a strong decorative style, with near every inch of the armour and greaves being patterned with detailed engravings. The upper regions of the armour are where the style becomes particularly wicked, with sharp spikes sprouting up from the neck, and most notably of all, the demonic black horns coming from the top of the helm, in contrast to the angelic wings coming off the Silver Knight's helm. I used to think that Gwyn's Black Knights were what his Silver Knights transformed into after their souls were burnt to ashes in the Kiln of the First Flame, hence the blacker look as if they'd been scorched, but no. Don't know why I ever thought this, because it's clearly horse shit. Why would the designs of the armour be completely changed by this, and why would the knight's choices of weapon change from straight sword and spear to great sword and great axe, etc. Also, the description for the Silver Knight's armour explicitly states that Gwyn split his knights into 2 groups, and even more also, the item description for each of the weapons says they were wielded when facing chaos demons, so it's clear that these were always a separate class of knight, trained and armed for fighting against the monstrosities born from the bed of chaos. And who better to accompany Gwyn as he'd attempt to control a different sort of flame. Lore misunderstandings aside though, the Black Knight set is very important to the story and history of the world of Dark Souls. It's why the very last level in the game is filled with Black Knights, and why it's the very last armour set you find before the final fight with Gwyn. And on any playthrough, regardless of what I might be wearing when I enter the kiln, when I face Lord Gwyn at the end, I'm always wearing the Black Knight set, before cheesing him with a Hornet's Ring and a target shield. Don't judge me. Come on, you didn't think I was going to leave out this Silver Knight set, did you? Of course not, because even if the Black Knight and Silver Knight sets are quite comparable, they are both incredibly stylish and cool. Unlike the Black Knight set, which you can clap eyes on within the first half hour or so of your playthrough, it takes a while till you catch sight of any Silver Knights, with them solely being found in Anor Londo. They don't appear anywhere else in the game, though an army of them does appear in the game's intro cutscene, standing solidly and silverly behind the great Lord Gwyn. Silverly? Ugh. As far as how you get a hold of their armour, it's the same sort of deal to the Black Knight armour, where you can just pick up the full set and the level they appear in, on the lower level of the room with all the mounted drake heads. Again, no Dark Souls 2 appearance, and furthermore you can't even get their weapons in the second game. There's not even a sniff of Silver Knights in Drangleic, though as ever, Dark Souls 3 would save us all by bringing them back. In fact, it brought back the whole of Anor Londo. Sure, why not? Thanks, Dark Souls 3. It feels good to be back.
Strong I am.
Not anymore, you're fucking dead, dumbass. The entire Silver Knight set can be farmed right here though. Took me quite a while too, because the drop rates are low, and inevitably, that annoying thing of getting multiples of the same piece made the whole experience a bit aggravating, but wasn't all that bad, and there is a bonfire nearby. Just like in Dark Souls 1, the Silver Knights only appear in Anor Londo, but with a single exception this time, that being Silver Knight Blaidd, who you can fight in the Ringed City. Though unlike every other Silver Knight who wields a sword, spear or greatbow, Blaidd uses his Great Hammer, which happens to be the single heaviest weapon in the entire game. The Silver Knight set is essentially a far brighter version of the Black Knight set, both in character and colour, which makes perfect sense too, because whilst the Black Knights would be out doing battle against monsters and demons, the Silver Knights were tasked with hanging back in Anor Londo to defend it against any and all invaders, serving as the penultimate line of defence before Ornstein and Smough, all of whom guard Princess Guinevere, daughter of... I'll be back in a second. Just got to pop to the bathroom. With the Silver Knights being permanent residents of Anor Londo, their appearance would have to be far cleaner and purer than their Black Knight counterparts, an idea exhibited very well by the wings protruding from their helmets, in contrast to black horns, tying into the whole deific and divine aspect of Anor Londo and its godly inhabitants. You can see a Silver Knight preparing to do battle against a dragon in the game's intro cutscene though, so it's clear that they were used more offensively at one point, at least until the arch-dragon threat was dealt with, though long after Anor Londo would fall to ruin after the events of the first Dark Souls, Silver Knights would remain in the castle, hence their continued presence here in the third game. Between the Black Knight and Silver Knight sets, I do prefer the former, but even so the latter is the perfect counterpart to the former. Bright and pure rather than dark and jagged, angelic and divine rather than demonic and malign. Above all though, cool. Shiny and cool. Okay then, how about some more Elden Ring? I've covered a lot of classics thus far, lots of sets that most players would probably agree deserve a spot on this list. But here at number 29, I'm going to talk about one that you could arguably say looks really, really stupid. That's you though, isn't it? Not me. Because personally, I think the Bull Goat set is the GOAT. Not really, it's not actually the greatest of all time. That would be going too far. But I still do really like it. The Bull Goat set is worn by Great Horned Tragoth, a famed knight of assistance. You can catch sight of this interestingly garbed knight during Jerin's Radan festival speech, and he can even assist in the battle, as can he with the Magma Worm Makar and Draconic Tree Sentinel fights, but of course no way for you to actually fight Tragoth yourself during these encounters, and who'd want to fight him? He seems like a swell guy. I'll tell you who is not a swell guy though, Patches. Because if you show mercy to Patches upon your first encounter with the blustering bald bastard, after joining the blasphemous recusants at Volcano Manor and carrying out an assassination or two, Patches will show up and very kindly pass intel regarding a key assassination target onto you. Well, it quite clearly says letter to Patches here, and furthermore, this letter has quite clearly been opened, unlike every other letter we get here. Well, if you travel to the boss room where you fought Magma Worm Makar in the ruin-strewn precipice, you can invade Great Horned Tragoth's world, whose armour you get after his defeat. You can tell Patches the good news that the target has been eliminated, to which he promises to pass on this information to Tanith himself. No need for us to bother her with this. As downright fishy as the whole affair with Tragoth is, one thing is for sure. Even if you think his set looks ridiculous, got to admit, it's eye-catching. Yes indeed, obviously, of course, the reason he's called Great Horned Tragoth is due to his incredibly thick and large peat horns covering the front and back of his body, taken from some vast goat or ram, and then incorporated into his set of black and gold armour, resulting in this enormous animalistic ensemble. The horns aren't just for show either, because this set happens to have the single highest defense and poise stats in the entire game, and you can take it even further by equipping the Bull Goat's talisman found in Dragon Barrow Cave for a massive poise buff on top of that. Even though the two mightiest horns do protrude from the front of the main armour piece, the horn motif is featured elsewhere too, with some being wrapped around the wrists, and furthermore there are golden horn-like patterns across both the front and back of the armour, and certainly on the helmet. The Bull Goat set might actually be the first in this whole list that I feel is somewhat let down by the helmet, rather than it being elevated by it. Its front portion mimics the form of a face, which I usually like, but I just don't think it looks all that great here. Not a big fan of the bubbly metallic beard. And furthermore, it looks like there's a hard cock coming out of the top of the helmet. I'm going to look like a right dickhead walking about with this helmet on, aren't I? Even bloody well so, I love the massive thick horn design so much that I'm willing to look past the head panis. And the black and gold colour scheme of the rest of the set also looks superb. It's like a bulkier version of Malekith's set. I spoke about a few lighter sets that featured in Elden Ring, but now it's time to showcase one from Dark Souls. Dark Souls 2. It's the Dragon Acolyte Set. Aldia's Keep is a strange place, a fucked up centre of cyclopean ogres, acid-dwelling dogs, and an assortment of mimics and monstrosities dangling from darkly lit cages, all of which make it abundantly clear that Aldia, the older brother of King Vendrick, was a twisted individual who dabbled in all manner of twisted shit. Though he did not do it alone, because throughout his keep, and most notably hidden behind a couple of large portraits, are his dragon acolytes. As with several Dark Souls 2 sets, had to do a good bit of farming here. I initially expected it to be quite obnoxious, what with the whole despawning thing that I've already covered, not to mention that there aren't that many dragon acolytes in the keep, but surprisingly it didn't take all that long. And I had already gotten lucky with one of them dropping their mask on an earlier playthrough, and let's face it, unintended. The mask is the highlight here. Mind you, let's not disregard the rest of the set, this strange pale garb fitted and equipped for conducting unspeakable rituals. In fact, you can see various tools and pouches strung along the waist, holding various implements of experimentation and dissection. Processes which inevitably involve the spilling of vast quantities of blood. The item descriptions for the various pieces specifically mention that the boots were designed for the acolyte to not slip on the blood, and that the white robes and gauntlets were fashioned so as to bear the brunt of the sacrifice's gushing life fluid. It's all very grisly and occult, with a dispassionate medical twist, with the acolytes' faces always hidden behind their nebulous orange masks. The mask is definitely one of the coolest headpieces in Dark Souls 2, and a favourite amongst Fashion Souls aficionados. I guess the closest thing to it is the Silver Tear mask from Elden Ring, though whereas the latter is constantly shifting and flowing, the former is still, with a terrible glaring eye staring out from the front, even further dehumanising the human staring out from within. But you know what? Dragon Acolyte? Ha, more like Dragon Akashite, because I'm all about that Dragonrider set. Like the Dragon Acolyte set, the Dragonrider set is exclusive to Dark Souls 2. In fact, the Dragonrider himself can actually be your very first boss if you initially head over to Hyde's Tower of Flame instead of going the Forest of Fallen Giants route. And for as basic and easy a boss as it is, I like it. Same with when you fight a pair of them much later in Drangleic Castle, always armed with their signature great shield, bow or halberd, though interestingly, you yourself can get a hold of the Dragonrider Twin Blade, which no in-game Dragonrider actually uses. And the only piece of Dragonrider gear that would manage to make it onto Dark Souls 3 would be the bow. As for the set though, well, until very recently I had no idea you can even get it for yourself. I thought it was like the blue-eyed knight armour in the original Demon Souls, because unlike most other boss armours, which you can buy from Morne the Armourer, he never sells this one. To get this set, you need to have beaten the twin Dragonriders in the castle and be on New Game Plus, or at least have used a bonfire ascetic at the first part of the Iron Keep, and only then does Magaroth here have it in stock, setting you back a total of 36k souls. I said how much I enjoyed the Dragonrider bosses, but I'll hold my hands up and admit that if they didn't look so gosh darn cool with that fine ass armour, I probably wouldn't be so keen on them. Lord Gwyn's royal guard were the Black and Silver Knights, but Vendrick's were the Dragonriders, so called because of the dragons that they rode. Worms, to be precise, though even though there are a few dragons in Dark Souls 2, you don't see any actual dragon riding hijinks, which is a bit of a shame. We'd have to wait until Dark Souls 3 to see that. Worm or no though, and all joking aside, I legitimately do think this is one of the all-time greatest Soulsborne Armour sets. Seriously, even though I'm not doing a ranking here, this set is in my top 5. I love armour that makes you look like a freaking tank when you're wearing it, much like some other sets I've already covered, but compared to all those, the Dragonrider's tones down the excessiveness in its size just a bit to allow for more elegance in its design. complete with a dark red coloration, complemented by regal engravings and inlays of silver and dark, leggings composed nearly entirely of chainmail, and a helm boasting 2 horns, not side by side as is the case with the Black Knights, but a large one coming out of the top with a smaller one coming out from between the eye holes. The Dragonrider set is big and bulky with a super appealing colour scheme and one of the all-time sickest helmets. I love it. I'd like to return to Elden Ring now to talk about the Fingerprint set, originally worn by a Knight of the Round Table, Vyke. The first place you encounter Vyke is as an invading phantom in Liurnia, near the Church of Inhibition, where he appears as festering Fingerprint Vyke, who uses a troublesome variety of frenzy-based incantations, not to mention the Frenzy Flame Thrust Ash of War from his singed and blistered war spear. He drops his weapon upon being defeated here, as well as his eye. But no set. If you challenge him at the Lord Contender's Everjail on the mountaintops of the Giants, however, he appears as Round Table Knight Vyke, and here he uses a variety of lightning attacks instead of the frenzy nonsense from before. Really great fight actually, and what makes it even greater is that he drops the Fingerprint set this time round. Thing is, for the most part this is a very conventional looking set. It doesn't even look all that dissimilar to your basic knight armour, though the dark tattered cape certainly does a lot for the... excuse me, do you mind? We're trying to shoot a video here. Thank you, arsehole. Obviously though, just as the most noteworthy aspect of the Ringed Knight set from Dark Souls 3 was the ring, the main feature of the Fingerprint set is the ghastly fingerprints, which was scorched into the main armour piece and helm by the 3 fingers down in the Frenzied Flame prescription. We can of course have the same thing done to us, though got to be naked when we do it, whereas Vyke's imprint was straight up just done through his armour. Regardless, it clearly still had the desired effect of imbuing him with the flame of frenzy, hence his fighting style as festering Fingerprint Vyke. Vyke actually has an extremely similar story to the Tarnished that we play as, himself having come closer than any other Tarnished at becoming Elden Lord before, without warning, he abandoned his journey to instead meet with the 3 fingers, presumably at the behest of Shabriri, the most reviled man in history, a man who also attempts to lure us to do the same, an act which would spare the life of millennia, but which would in turn doom the world to an eternity of chaos and incineration. I like a weapon or spell or set of armour that tells a story with its appearance, and the Fingerprint set does just that. The story of another hero who should have become Elden Lord, but instead, for one reason or another, chose the path of chaos, a path initiated with 3 burning, singeing fingerprints. We are not done talking about Bloodborne though, folks. No. Certainly not. And indeed, here at number 33, I have Gascoigne Set, which is of course worn by everyone's favourite Irishman, Father Gascoigne. No hoops to jump through or enemies needing farmed for this get-up. All you need to do is defeat the good father at the Tomb of Odin, after which it can be purchased with a handful, or should I say headful, of insight over in the Hunter's Dream. I've selected a good mixture of stuff for my list here, because there's simply a superb variety of different sets to showcase and discuss from these games. I like going from talking about the Dragon Acolyte Set 1 minute to talking about the Dragonrider Set the next, but in a way, Gascoigne Set might just be one of the most unique sets here in that it is very much understated. There is no joy or colour in its design, but rather just different shades of black with a bit of grey. I have featured other dark sets in this video, especially the like of the Iron Dragon Slayers and Rain sets, but as pure black as they were, you sure as shit can't call them subtle or understated, and nor are they supposed to be. Gascoigne Set on the other hand is fairly simple, featuring black trousers, a lightly armoured vest, a black shawl, and most stylishly of all as far as I'm concerned, a black flat brim cap. I suppose the most unusual aspect of the set is the gloves, which, although themselves being black, are also covered in bandages, a familiar aesthetic in Bloodborne. In fact, Gascoigne's own eyes are bandaged, rendering him conventionally blind. What might initially look like a simple scarf is actually the tattered remains of a shawl of the Healing Church. However, Even though you might assume Father Gascoigne is a member of the Healing Church's clergy, perhaps of a lower rank to the likes of Vicar Amelia, this is not the case. In fact, there is no such rank of father in the Healing Church, and though he was once one of its hunters, Gascoigne would later leave the church before eventually succumbing to the bestial thirst for the sweet blood, losing his mind and slaughtering his wife Viola in a violent frenzy during one of his episodes. Episodes that only the bright tones from the tiny music box had previously been able to lull him from. There are a couple of other sets in Bloodborne that somewhat resemble Gascoigne's garb, but I think his has this uniquely, and again I'll use this word, understated and ominous power to it, much of which admittedly is due to the fantastic and tragic character who originally wears the set. There are many more visually loud and colourful and heavy and even impressive armours and such that I have not included in my list in favour of Gascoigne's, but this is a list of what I consider to be the coolest sets, and to me, this is cool. Also, it reminds me of Harmon Smith from Killer 7, and I love Killer 7, so bonus points for that too. Time for another Dark Souls 3 exclusive. It's the Winged Knight set. Although there are a few DS3 sets on this list that I absolutely had to farm for, thankfully the Winged Knight set wasn't among them. There really aren't all that many of these enemies in the game. In fact, there's just one in the High Wall of Lothric and a couple in Lothric Castle. And then of course you have the 3 ascended ones at the top of the Grand Archives, but none of them actually drop their armour. For that, just gotta bust through the illusory wall up where the twin axe wielding one jumps down from, and then grab the full set from the corpse directly in front of a beautiful painting of a Winged Knight. Reminds me of the painting of Nashandra in Dranglake Castle in Dark Souls 2 that curses you when you stand near it, though thankfully this one does not curse you. I know I only just got talking about the virtues of the quiet blackness of Gascoigne's set, but at the other end of the spectrum, how about this bulky round hunk of cold winged steel and blue cloth, which features one of the most disturbing helm designs of any FromSoft game. And it really is the theme of this set that's central to why I like it so much. It's the angelic aspect combined with a cruel and frightening twist. In a few of my other videos, especially my retrospectives on the Blasphemous games, I've spoken about how uniquely compelling it is when heavenly and angelic themes are combined with horror and malevolence. When you take concepts and beings which are traditionally depicted as appearing pure and beautiful and benevolent and twist them into something meaner. It's one of the reasons the horror of Alex Kister's Mandela catalogue series is so effective. Dark Souls 3 plays on this theme elsewhere too, like with the angels in the Dreg Heap. These shrieking winged monstrosities who attack you with holy beams of light and shower you in angelic feathers which, rather than healing or blessing you, causes curse build-up. I find it uniquely interesting on a special level, and it applies to the Winged Knight set too. Instead of serving Prince Lothric, these knights allied themselves to the angels, one of whom visited the maiden Gertrude, whose corpse you can find in a cage suspended from the top of the Grand Archives, a cage littered with feathers. You'd expect the servants of actual angels to themselves appear reasonably pure and angelic, perhaps wearing something akin to the Silver Knight set or even the Lothric Knight set, but instead, the armour looks almost bloated, and the helm features an unnerving steel grin. There's nothing angelic about it at all, though I suppose if the angel that visited Gertrude looked anything remotely close to the kind we see in the Dreg Heap, it's understandable why its servants should be so monstrous in their appearance. Mind you, there is a set of wings coming out of the back, but these are very small and purely decorative, which is not something you can say about the Ascended Winged Knights, who I think are one of the coolest looking enemies of any Dark Souls game, being larger in size than the regular variants, wearing golden armour instead of iron, and having full sets of feathery wings, with which they can hover to respectable heights for special attacks. The tragedy with these boys though is that you cannot get their set for yourself, and that does not make me glad, it makes me sad. Even so, I still do consider this to be a top tier set. And now let's move from one chunky boy onto another, with Havel Set. Of course we need to talk about Havel Set. Another special one too, because just like the Elite Knight set, it appears in all 3 Dark Souls games. I spoke about those early Black Knight experiences for new Dark Souls players, but an encounter which is arguably even more terrifying is when you first meet Havel, who's chilling down in the Watchtower basement, which connects the Undead Burg to the Undead Parish and Darkroot Basin, and the reason he's so damn terrifying is that he can do this. Mind you, even if you manage to kill him here, no set for you, though he does drop the insanely powerful Havel's Ring, which they would also bring back for Dark Souls 3, except it's way worse in that game. Through an illusory wall situated behind a fireplace in Anor Londo Castle, Havel's entire set, weapon and shield can be picked up from 4 chests, but what's in this chest? In Dark Souls 2, Havel makes another couple of appearances, though both are utterly obnoxious. The one which appears as a phantom in one of the Dark Chasms of old, and the other fought as Ancient Soldier Varg in the unforgivably terrible Gank Squad boss fight. But Havel's set can be retrieved from behind a locked door in the gutter after you get the Forgotten Key from the Black Gulch. Dark Souls 3's Havel appearance is certainly the grandest, with him standing over the corpse of a wyvern in Archdragon Peak, and after he's been defeated, his set can be picked up at the spot where the stray demon was stomping around above Farron Keep. Above all, Havel's set is known for one thing, and that is being insanely heavy and sturdy. In fact, you could argue that it was too sturdy for its own good back in Dark Souls 1, specifically in the PvP scene. Who could forget all those annoying little fuckers who would just stick on Havel's armour with Havel's ring and spam Darkbead? Cool, guess I'll just die then. GG no re. But heck, as the item descriptions say, the armour was literally carved from solid rock. In fact, Havel himself was known as Havel the Rock, though perhaps even more notoriously than that was his choice of weapon. An enormous tooth torn from an everlasting dragon, and his placement in Archdragon Peak here strongly implies that it was he who killed this wyvern. Mind you, although I named a few iterations of Havel there from the 3 games, obviously they're not all the original dude. Seems like the guy at the bottom of the Watchtower in Dark Souls 1 was the man himself, as implied by the Watchtower key description. Whereas I assume everyone else we see are simply Havel's warriors who fought in his same style, kinda similarly to how we see someone wearing Ornstein's armour in Dark Souls 2. Then again, I'm no Havel expert, go watch Hawkshaw's videos on the subject, he's got 2 hours of material there for you. But watch my video first please. Please. The armour is described as being carved from a rock, and yes, it looks like it too. Unlike lots of other heavy sets I've covered, like Smo's, the Fire Prelates, and the Winged Knights, there are no grand crests, colours or ornate patterns featured here. You've simply got grooved grey rock. In fact, the only additional adornment to be found throughout the whole set is the presence of chains wrapped around the gauntlets and leggings. Though even these would likely be for additional protection rather than being there to look pretty. Gotta say though, the helm is very stylish in its own way, featuring a solid stone thing here instead of a traditional knight's tassel. You've got some Dark Souls sets which are legendary for how stylish they look, but Havel's set is legendary for its toughness. It is big, heavy and grey. Let's take another trip to the lands between for number 36. In fact, let's travel north of the mainland to Miquella's Haligtree. This is the Haligtree Knight Set. Now, there are quite a few variations of knight sets in this game, with their appearances differing depending on which region they are based in, and they all look great. But rather than me just picking all of them, I wanted to feature my favourite, and that is the Haligtree Knight Set, of course worn by Haligtree Knights found in Elfale. I had to farm for it too, and although it only took about half an hour-ish, it was quite difficult. Elfale is not an easy level at all, and it's made even more difficult with the putrid avatars situated around the place, especially this one here, standing sentinel in between a pair of Haligtree Knights. In fact, I don't think I've ever bothered to actually beat this specific one before now, because it's just not a fun experience. I do enjoy fighting Erdtree avatars, but the putrid ones aren't so fun with how much you need to keep running away to avoid this scarlet rot. And then when you do run away, they'll sometimes just break and repeatedly spam their annoying golden laser attack where you just can't fucking do anything. Thankfully though, this one doesn't respawn after being nailed, and so I farmed these two fuckboys by its side for every piece of their set. Really awesome enemy, by the way. Like I said, every knight set has its own aesthetic, featuring different colour schemes, crests and decorations. A few of them have tassels of different colour, but the Leyndell knights stand out quite a bit due to the golden half disc sprouting from their helms, meant to represent the Erdtree. Looks pretty cool. The Haligtree set, however, is the most special in my view. The helm doesn't feature a bright tassel or disc, but rather a simple crown of unalloyed gold, and the crest of the Haligtree is emblazoned across the white cape and left breast of the armour to represent the tree which, although it was watered with Miquella's own blood, never grew to the golden height of its rival across the sea. I don't really have much more to say about this set, to be honest. I just think it looks excellent, with a different, quieter and more compelling sort of grace to its design compared to the other knight sets. We had fun talking about the quiet golden grace of the Haligtree Knight set there, I hope, but I would like to swerve from one side of the spectrum to the other, so let's go from that to this, the Ironclad set from Dark Souls 2, or should I perhaps say the Ironchad set? Actually no, let's just call it the Ironclad set. The appearance of this armour is actually quite unique amongst the Soulsborne games in that you can see it in two different states of physical deterioration. The Ironclad enemies found throughout the Forest of Fallen Giants both wear and drop the old Ironclad set, a moss-stained mass of extremely heavy iron. The pieces of this set in particular have a really cool item description too, saying, "One day, warriors wearing decrepit armour emerged from Drangleic Castle, and quietly assumed positions amongst the royal army. Not one of them ever spoke a word, or revealed the face under the mask." You don't actually see any ironclad enemies in Drangleic Castle yourself, but over in the Iron Keep, there are a lot of them, serving as a slower but arguably more intimidating enemy compared to the lightning-quick speed and technique of the Elon Knights. Furthermore, these guys drop for a regular Ironclad set, which boasts a far more pristine aesthetic, and with better stats and durability than its old ass Forest of the Fallen Giants counterpart. It's strongly implied, or rather pretty much stated, that there aren't any actual people inside this armour, though unlike the case with the Black Knights where their bodies were turned to ash while their spirits carried on, the Ironclad soldiers were minions created by the old Iron King. The Ironclad set might lack the unsightly mossy coating of the old version, but that still doesn't make it look all that fancy. Rather, it's clear that the one and only objective was to make it as big, bulky and protective as possible, so bulky that it's just about too much for a human to wear, because just like the other creations of the old Iron King, they are inhabited, or rather, possessed purely by souls. As brutal and intimidating as the front of the armour is though, that's hardly what the Ironclad set is known for, because we also have the rear section, which is the thickest part of the whole ensemble, being shaped like a turtle shell to provide excellent protection against rear attacks. In fact, both you and the Ironclad enemies are totally immune to backstabs when wearing the chest piece. Really cool example of an armour's visual design also having a notable effect on gameplay. Another reason the Ironclad set is so damn cool, however, is that it looks very similar to what's worn by the character Bezuzo in the Berserk manga, with the addition of the turtle section of course. This wouldn't be the only homage to this character, if indeed these are homages and not just coincidences, because in Dark Souls 3 there's also the Executioner set, worn by Horus the Hushed, which has much the same aesthetic, though I prefer the Ironclad myself. It's just that bit more outrageously bulky. Enough! That's enough chattering about heavy armour for now. Let's pay another visit to Yharnam, or rather, Yahar'gul! It's the Yahar'gul set. You've got different branches of the Healing Church, like the Choir, and various offshoot organisations like the Executioners, and you've even got your scores from Bergenworth, where all the horror began. But just off from Cathedral Ward, you have Yahar'gul, Unseen Village, an ominous and malevolent place of mind-blasting horror, where the school of Mensis work their surreptitious rituals in the dark. And of course, Yahar'gul also has its very own brand of hunter, those being the Yahar'gul Hunters. You can find a pair of them just off from the Grand Cathedral, and an infernal fucking trio of them inside Yahar'gul itself after the place becomes especially nightmarish once Rom has been defeated. I hate these guys. Back when discussing the hoarse set at number 20, I mentioned that there were only one or two other Bloodborne sets which boasted any sort of metallic shielding, and indeed, the Yahar'gul set is one of them. Specifically the helmet, which is essentially a heavy iron cage, somewhat gladiatorial in style. The Mensis scholars do of course wear their bizarre Mensis cage around their heads, but the hunters wear a thicker, more brutal sort, aiding with both combat and kidnapping, rather than facilitating contact with the Great Ones of the Dream. The set also has an alternate headpiece too, which still features the iron helmet except with a black hood covering it, rendering it even more ominous and with slightly increased resistance to some status effects. As for the rest of the ensemble, it's almost the inverse of the male version of the White Church set, except intensely darker and more frayed and ragged, especially the torn cape visible atop the shoulders. There's also an interesting rope aspect to the set, draped over the shoulders to give it all an even shabbier look. Although the wearers of this set are called hunters, this is in name only, with their main purpose being to kidnap people to aid in Mensis's unspeakable rituals with nightmares and flesh, the results of which you can see vividly in Yahar'gul. It's a dark and ominous set, most befitting this dark and ominous village, and it's one of the coolest sets in Bloodborne. Oof, too spooky for me though, mate. I do believe I need a palate cleanser after all that horrible, horrific horror. So let's go somewhere a bit brighter, a bit lighter. Let's go to Dark Souls 2's Elaeum Loyce for the Rampart Golem Set. For as much criticism as you can throw at Dark Souls 2's base game, even many of its detractors do admit that the 3 DLCs are significantly better in pretty much every way. Yes, the DLCs do, without exaggeration, each contain the worst levels in all of Soulsborne, but that aside, everything else is pretty fucking great. As far as enemies, you will be fighting a lot of soldier type dudes which are given palette, equipment and moveset swaps based on the prevailing element of the DLC, which in the case of the Crown of the Ivory King is ice. These enemies aren't all that interesting to fight or look at, but they're fine I guess. However, as you pass further through this frigid forsaken place, you will encounter the Rampart Golems, who are much bigger, buffer and more attractive. As in, I like their armour set. So let's farm it. Y'all know the dealio by now. It's Dark Souls 2, so farming can be a real bitch. But thankfully, there's a good spot right by the bonfire which leads to the level which shall not be named. And there are 3 golems quite close by. Took around 25 minutes for me to get the full set. And thankfully I managed to get every piece before any of these guys despawned. You know what's cool? Ice. The ice aesthetic. And more so than any other set from any other FromSoft game, the Rampart Golem set delivers that aesthetic. That's not to say that every piece of the armour is literally made of ice, but it's largely encased in it, giving the metal beneath a uniquely frosty aesthetic. In fact, it kind of looks like Ornstein's armour if you left it in the freezer for a few days. The Rampart Golem set's uniquely bright colour makes it perfect for mixing and matching with other sets, because usually when just passing through the level, I'd naturally get at least one piece of their armour to drop, but this is the first time I actually sat and farmed for the whole shebang, and it was well worth it. You really do look like a badass ice knight with it on, and that's in large part to the helmet in particular, which is made up of shards of hard ice formed on top of cold steel. Also, I know we're not talking about shields in this video, but the Rampart Golem shield is also cool as fuck, which, unlike the armour, seems to be entirely composed of ice, which is great up until you notice that it has 5 durability. Anyway, cool set. Armour set number 40 happens to be one worn by one of my absolute favourite enemies from Dark Souls 3, and certainly one of my all-time favourite knights. It is the Cathedral Knight Set. You first see these ironclad behemoths stalking the murky halls and chapels of the Cathedral of the Deep, usually flanked or surrounded by thralls and deacons, you know, all that shit no one likes. The Cathedral Knights are different though, being big, heavy and extremely powerful with wide, wild attacks from their maces and greatswords. The only other place they are to be found is in the Consumed King's Garden, where instead of being immersed and surrounded by the sludge of the deep, they guard the toxified grounds leading to King Osiris. Got another case here where farming is required. There are a couple of decent spots for this, but I just went back and forth from Osiris's boss arena out to the garden, and it took about 25 minutes for every piece to eventually drop. This is another big, heavy armour set that simply does not fuck around. In fact, just as you might expect from looking at it, it's one of the heaviest in the game, though it doesn't weigh quite as much as the likes of the Winged Knights, Havels and the Exile sets. Even though there isn't really any other set in the game that looks similar to the Cathedral Knight set, in a way it does have a sort of conventional design. Not conventional from FromSoft, but it is very reminiscent of depictions of Crusader armour, though for the most part that is due to the Great Helm. In fact, unless I'm very much mistaken, the only other example of a Great Helm of a similar shape is that of the Hyde Knight's Great Helm. I'd love to show me wearing that helm, but as discussed in part 1, I couldn't get the fucking thing to drop. The Cathedral Knight set is largely composed of heavy metal plating and chainmail, which, as well as being wrapped around the arms, also drapes down, resulting in a sort of chainmail cape effect. And whereas most heavy armours tend to look rather clear and pristine in their designs, this one clearly looks battle worn, featuring various marks and dents along the breastplate, though rather than this making it look all shitty, I think it adds to its character. There is an unfortunate aspect to the set though, that being that the armour the Cathedral Knight enemies wear looks way fucking cooler than the set we get, featuring bright blue robes over the legs and a far more striking black and gold colour scheme instead of the duller silvery one we get, being present on both the main armour and the helmet. Really no idea why the version we get is so much less impressive than what the enemies get, but even so, I love it and I think it's more than cool enough to earn a spot on my list. Folks, back at number 36 I spoke about how much I love the way Elden Ring's regional knights looked, with all their brightly coloured armours with their differing helm decorations and such. But you can find all those knights strolling proudly out in the open, sometimes on their own though often with backup. My pick for number 41, however, is a set worn by a far more furtive and shadowy knight. One that only ever actually appears in the Black of Night. It's the Knight's Cavalry Set. Did you know that there are 10 different Knight's Cavalry bosses found throughout the Land Between? You can be forgiven for not knowing, because as implied by the name, they only ever appear at night, meaning many of them are all too easily missable, largely because most of the time when you're out exploring, it's not nighttime. The first one you're likely to encounter is in green, grassy Limgrave, over on the bridge just before the lead up to Storm Hill, where you will discover that not only do these enemies only appear at night, but just like the Erdtree and Draconic Tree Sentinels, they are always to be found riding horses. Though unlike those two bosses, these guys can be knocked off their horses. The Knight's Cavalry do tend to drop worthwhile rewards after being defeated, but if you want their set, got to head all the way over to everyone's favourite sub-region, the Consecrated Snowfields, where at night you will see a carriage being hauled by a pair of snowy trolls, flanked by a large retinue of pages and nobles, and most notably of all, a pair of Knight's Cavalry. I do actually enjoy fighting this enemy, but not when there are two of them. This fight stinks. The bright side though is that once both have been felled, you get that sweet armour. Although it's not obvious at first, the Knight's Cavalry were once led by the fell Omen, aiding him in his mission of delivering death to Tarnished who would covet the Elden Throne. After Margit has been defeated, he even says,
"Cower in fear of the night. The hands of the fell Omen shall brook thee."
Presumably referencing his cavalry, though in the current age they have all been scattered across the land in odd places, much like the Crucible Knights who once served the fell Omen's father, Lord Godfrey. The Knight's Cavalry set is essentially what you get if you cross a Knight Set variant with the Black Knife set. It's not without decoration and adornment, but near all of that adornment is of the purest black, from the bushy helmet tassel to the flowing black cape. I guess the only thing that is not black is the lighter chain necklace of sorts, and the subtle splatters of dried blood from victims. The cutaway of the helm's visor is more slanted than horizontal like your more traditional knight sets, so as to give it an especially malevolent aura. And unlike traditional knight's gloves, these ones are pointed at the fingertips. All this is clearly supposed to inspire terror in would-be champions, and hell, it does work. This can stop you in your tracks when you're out roaming at night and you see one of these darkly armoured knights patrolling some remote area. As an aside though, I do wish Elden Ring would let you customise Torrent. The war horses rode by the Erdtree Sentinel, the malformed Dragon Sentinel, Loretta and absolutely the Knight's Cavalry all look so cool in their unique armour and robes, whereas all we have is goofy ass Torrent here with his dumb cow horns. At number 42 I have the armour belonging to my single favourite NPC character in all of Elden Ring. It's the Omen Set. The Omen Set is actually one of the very first armours you even see, with it showing up in the intro sequence introducing the main characters, worn by the loathsome Dung Eater, a twisted psychopathic murderer and defiler of corpses. A defilement which forever prevents the souls of his victims from returning to the Erdtree, the same curse which naturally afflicts the misfortunate ogre-like beings known as the Omens. In fact, Omen horns can literally be seen growing from the seedbed curses cultivated by the Dung Eater, physical manifestations of his loathsome pox. In short, the Dung Eater is an evil cunt. And if you can't resist slaughtering him down in the subterranean shunning grounds as soon as you get access to his cell, you will be rewarded with his set. Or alternatively, you can render him a puppet by giving him Selvis's potion, or just complete his questline in its entirety for both his set and the mending rune of the fell curse. It's self-poxed and blistered with horns, which brings us to the appearance of his Omen set. This rank, rusted armour is made thus to represent the landscape of the Dung Eater's mind, who, although he was a human, wished to see himself as an omen. Although you do encounter a few omens with all their grotesque bodily horns still intact and sprouting every which way, most of them have had their horns crudely excised due to the extent to which normal humans abhor any physical manifestation which harkens back to a time before the Golden Order and the Erdtree. It's why the misbegotten are similarly mistreated, and why Crucible Knights also became outcasts of sorts due to their association with the Crucible. Indeed, the Omen set is made to look like an omen with its horns cut off, featuring innumerable crudely sliced stumps sticking out of the foul red rusted armour, though perhaps some of that red is from the blood of his victims. More so than perhaps any other armour set from any FromSoft game, this one looks like it would stink. It looks fucking minging, man. And you can even see strands and clumps of matted hair hanging down from some spots. The sun medallion hanging from the neck is certainly an interesting and far less grim aspect to the set though, being very much at odds with the filthy foulness of the rest of it. The item description for the armour reads, "Worn by the Dung Eater." The heavy sun-shaped medallion represents both the guidance he once saw and the ring to which it will one day lead. Was initially quite confused by this, but I guess the ring being referred to here is the mending rune of the fell curse, which would represent his life's work. A ring to be incorporated into the metaphysical structure of the Elden Ring, so that every living soul in the lands between would be affected by the Omen curse. In any case, I love this armour set. It's not meant to be grand and shiny with gold engravings and a colourful helm tassel and a bright cape. It's meant to be a rejection of all that, a rancid rejection of gold in favour of filth and curse-laden hate. Yes indeed, ladies and germs, the Dung Eater is a foul character indeed, and his armour is fucking disgusting, which is why I like it. It's interesting. But for now, why don't we travel over to the opposite end of the spectrum of likeability and talk about Blaidd Set. Yes indeed, Blaidd is a fan favourite of Elden Ring, and it's easy to see why, though I know folk love a bit of Alexander too, and it's also easy to see why. I sure wish we got to wear his set, can you imagine? Even though you might be dying to try on Blaidd's set as quickly as possible, and who could blame you, as far as I'm aware the only way to get it is by finishing Ranni's questline. Apparently if you attack him early he will just disappear, much like how Selvis does if you're too eager to attack him. Thus, got to go through Ranni's whole quest, involving Blaidd, Selvis and Iji, all of which concludes in Blaidd frenzying just outside of Ranni's tower in the Three Sisters, just as he was hardwired to do by Ranni's two fingers in the event that she stray from the intended path of the Empyrean, which, with our help, is exactly what she does do. And finally, upon Blaidd's defeat, usually after he's managed to kill me at least once because his moveset is fucking wild, you get his armour, gauntlets, greaves and royal greatsword, but no mask. Fear not though, because just by Selvis's tower you can simply retrieve it from some ruins. I'd already picked it up so you can't see it here, but trust me, this is where you get it. Not sure why it's over here where Selvis worked, though maybe it's got something to do with the Preceptor's depraved puppeteering proclivities. Selvis's perversions aside though, Blaidd's set is quite unique in regards to the headpiece. There are several Soulsborne sets which feature bestial, monstrous or demonic helm or mask designs, like Vengarl's, the Smelter Demons and Morne sets, not to mention your various imp heads and such. But Blaidd's mask isn't just some stony or metallic representation of a non-human, instead it is fashioned directly after the half-wolf's likeness, featuring facial fur, a snarling snout, and even an injured left eye, precisely mimicking the lupine visage of Blaidd. At first glance, the mask's existence kind of implies that Blaidd himself might himself be wearing a mask. Himself. Because indeed, other than his head, everything else seems wholly human, certainly his soft, clear voice, in stark contrast to the overtly bestial features of the likes of Malekith. But no, he actually is a half-wolf, one assigned as Ranni's shadow specifically because of this. As the item description for the Raging Wolf armour says, according to the old legends, wolves are the shadows of the Empyrean. For as enjoyable a character as Blaidd certainly is, I know some folk aren't really all that hot on the mask, which I do get, it's a bit much, but I personally like it well enough, and the rest of the set is even better, especially the main armour piece with its long grey wolf pelt cape, which looks fantastic. It's one of the single nicest looking pieces in the game, especially with the additional purple layer near the shoulders. I bet you thought I wasn't ever going to talk about Demon Souls again, didn't you? Well, that's correct, I wasn't. This is a fake out. Now on to the next armour set. Not really though, that was another fake out. In fact, from number 44 here to number 49, I'm going to go through the games in order, starting with Demon Souls Brushwood Set. As you've heard me say, a few of the sets on this list happen to belong to some of my favourite characters from these games, and sometimes that in itself makes the armour more appealing for me to want to wear it for myself. And much the same is true of the Brushwood set, which is worn by dear sweet Bior. Fairly easy character to miss, but you can rescue the grizzled old knight of Boletaria after getting the Iron Ring of Keys from the fat official in the Inner Ward, which can be used to enter the small jail section at the end of the Lord's Path. And indeed, for as gallant and noble and lovable as Bior is, if you like, you can murder the man for his armour, either here or back in the Nexus. Thankfully though, that is not necessary, because if you've got either pure black or white world tendency, behind that gate back in 1-1, you can find the whole Brushwood set at the bottom of the corpse pit, though again make sure to watch out for Executioner Esmeralda, or whatever the fuck her name is. The Brushwood set is to Demon Souls what Havel set is to Dark Souls. It is the heaviest armour in the game, and it offers the greatest physical defence, not to mention superb fire resistance. That might seem strange considering it's called the Brushwood set, but the thing is, it's not actually made of wood at all, so I don't know why it's called that. Regardless though, it's a striking set of armour. I compared it to Havel's set, but where the armour is solid grey and as unyielding as a rock, the Brushwood set in comparison is bright, engraved, highly decorative and quite magnificent, as befits perhaps King Alant's most brave and fearsome knight, at least until conditions in Boletaria took such a dire and demonic turn, leading to Bior's imprisonment. I really was a late comer to the Brushwood set, largely because, historically, both in the original and in the remake, I never really tried it on because of how damn heavy it was, but I'm glad I eventually did, because it's for sure one of the best looking sets in the game, and a brighter alternative to the far darker designs of the Gloom and Dark Silver sets. The last three armour sets I've spoken about have belonged to really great NPCs who are themselves elevated in memorability and flavour thanks to their distinctive appearances, and at number 45 here, the trend continues, with Chester's set. Marvellous Chester is one of the most interesting characters in Dark Souls 1, and that is largely due to how damn out of place he is in its universe. I mean, our own character is quite out of place in Oolacile, the land of golden sorcery, having been violently pulled into the past by the monstrous arm of Manus through an abyssal portal in Darkroot Basin. But Chester is on another level of oddness, with his dark leathery swag and top hat. Same voice actor as Osiris from Dark Souls 3 and Jura from Bloodborne, by the way. What's extra odd is that Chester straight up invades you in Oolacile Township shortly after you meet him, though rather than dropping his luscious set there, all you get is exactly 9,505 souls. To get his set though, got to kill him back near the narrow bridge where he's in his non-phantom form, and turns out that isn't easy. The bastard killed me a good 3 times before I finally got him. But get him I did, and behold, now I, a Marvellous Chester, mischievous grin and all. There are of course a variety of light and moderate weight armour sets in Dark Souls 1, but Chester's is something else. Looking far more similar to what some sinister otherworldly aristocrat might wear, featuring a long black leathern suit, an elegant neckerchief, and a red rose sticking out of the jacket's lapel. It certainly still seems robust and battle ready, however, and there's even a short gold-handled dagger tucked away down the straps of the right trouser leg. Although the whole set is superb and very unique for this game and the 2 Dark Souls games which would come after, it's the hat that really completes it, especially with how your character is forced into an unnaturally wide grin. Seems like a pretty strong homage to the fat officials from Demon's Souls on PS3 actually. The other connection folk make, however, is of course that Chester very much looks like a Bloodborne character, having the same compact black leather aesthetic as Yhar'gul's Hunters, though obviously Bloodborne wouldn't come out for another 4.5 years after Dark Souls. It's a fun idea to play around with, that Chester was somehow brought to Oolacile from Yhar'gul, but that's really all it is, a fun idea. I mean, our character was brought to Oolacile, but not from a different world, it was from the future. I guess you could say, well, maybe Bloodborne is in the same universe as Dark Souls, but way into the future, and then Armored Core is set even further into the future than that, but you know, probably not. And in any case, my point is here, and now, Chester's set is very cool. Let's return back to the world of Dark Souls now for set number 46, the Throne Defender set. Everybody complains about the various double boss fights featured in Elden Ring, like the Knight's Cavalry fight I spoke about not 10 minutes ago, but let's not forget that the Dark Souls games themselves had examples of dynamic duos also. Fuck. The anti-penultimate boss in Dark Souls 2 is in fact a double fight against the Throne Defender and Throne Watcher. It's actually a rather decent fight to be fair, and it has the same revival mechanic that would go on to feature for the Witches of Hemwick boss in Bloodborne and also the Twin Princes in Dark Souls 3. After they've been beaten though, cocky old Mullen the Armourer will have the sets for both the Throne Watcher and Defender in stock for purchase. Yeehaw! Right, that's enough of that. The Watcher set is okay and has a unique style to it, but I don't love it. The shield you can transpose from its soul is one of the coolest in the game. It makes a bell-like noise when struck due to it having been constructed from an old sacred chime, kinda like a shield version of Velstat's sacred chime hammer. But my pick is for the Throne Defender set, which is far bulkier and a decent bit heavier, though it's not quite as heavy as you might think from looking at it. One thing is for sure though, this is absolutely an armour set with a presentation befitting a Guardian of the Throne. In fact, it looks so outlandishly regal that you could have fooled me into thinking that this is what King Vendrick would have worn, rather than the actual King's set which, although still nice, looks far more modest in comparison. Although it's not the most brightly coloured armour on this list, it is extremely grand and decorative, with complex grooves and patterns engraved into the bronze chest piece, greaves and gauntlets, with 2 long white streams of fabric flowing down from each shoulder, emblazoned with sequences of black glyphs, while on the back there is an even longer, thicker cape with the inverse colour scheme. The helmet is especially noteworthy, having a strange conical shape, but never mind the shape. How about that complimentary thick moustache and modest beard that goes with the helm? Sadly though, just as how a couple of other sets from this list haven't quite lived up to the full magnificence of the enemies they are derived from, the same is true here, with the actual Throne Defender having a way longer beard. Big, dirty beard or not though, top tier armour set. Now on to Dark Souls 3 for number 47 with Morne's set. Even though it's called Morne's set, the armour does not belong to anyone named Morne, but instead to Egon of Carim, with Morne being some holy figure, the Archbishop's apostle, who the armour was modelled on. Got to be honest, I don't exactly know what modelled on means, but let's move on. With this being a set belonging to Egon, as you might expect, he is key to getting a hold of it yourself. He cuts an incredibly intimidating figure the way he sits here clad in his holy armour with his absurdly enormous hammer on full display. Seriously, that hammer looks absolutely wild. It's actually quite similar in size and appearance to Brand used by Garl Vinland in Demon's Souls. Has a strength requirement of 50 and a faith requirement of 30 too. Pretty damn steep. You can kill Egon upon seeing him, either here or at Firelink Shrine, at which point his set can be purchased from the Shrine Maiden, or you can follow his quest, with him being the Guardian of Arena, a failed firekeeper who he is tasked with protecting for his entire life, though she's rather cruelly locked inside a cell when we meet her, and Egon is also strangely scornful when he speaks of her. I'll be honest, I usually just fucking forget about these two after the initial meeting. Dark Souls 3's questlines are quite interesting with a lot of really great moments, but goddamn they can be complex, convoluted and sometimes easy to mess up. But usually what happens for me is that Egon just dies on his own somehow, also allowing you to just buy his apparel from the Maiden. And you can even collect his weapon and shield from his corpse, which lies in the same spot where Arena was first locked away. I know I've said this a whole bunch of times now, but for as cool as the set looks, the headpiece in particular is the cherry on the sundae. The helmet is modelled so as to be a perfect likeness to the stone gargoyles found on Morne's Cathedral in Carim. Now that I look at it, it looks rather similar to the imp heads in Elden Ring, the long-tongued version in particular, except obviously this helm is far cooler. Also, I actually quite like Egon as a character, which is not something I can say about Elden Ring's imps. The rest of the set is composed of a unique mineral resembling stone, and indeed the main armour piece and gauntlets do appear particularly stark and stony, with a near complete absence of flourishes, and certainly no presence of unnecessary colour. Though the greaves of all things do feature several grooves and engravings. The whole set's a pretty decent reflection of Egon's own grim and foreboding disposition, and it also does a good job at revealing just a bit more context to the land of Carim. A land which Lautrec and Oswald from Dark Souls 1 were also from. It's a visually powerful set and I like it. I spoke about Chester's attire back at number 45 with its similarity to those featured heavily in Bloodborne, but now for number 48 we're going to talk about another actual Bloodborne set, and the last set from that game that will be featuring on this list, the Old Hunter Set. There are of course a variety of different hunter sets in Bloodborne, though although the themes of the game do get very deep, cosmic and Lovecraftian, the starting thrust of it all is the hunt, wherein hunters must slay beasts so as to once again bring relative peace to Yharnam, at least before the coming of the next dreadful and bloody scourge. You've got stuff like the Hunter Set, the Yharnam Hunter Set, the Ashen Hunter Set, the Charred Hunter Set, and a bunch more, and pretty much all of them are superb looking. But my personal favourite is something which dates back before all these styles, back to the time of the Old Hunters. I am of the opinion that the Old Hunters DLC is one of the greatest pieces of gaming content ever made, and while there are many reasons for that, one reason is the presence of the titular Old Hunters, a breed of beast slayers far larger, more brutal, more ferocious, more insane and more bloodthirsty than the calibre of blood-drunk hunters you encounter out in modern day Yharnam. They're a great enemy. In fact, they are literally my favourite enemy in the whole game, and thankfully you can get their set, which much like the Constable set is situated around the Hunter's Nightmare, and you can even get an alternative top hat headpiece if you're not a fan of the basic cap. Should also highlight the decorative Old Hunter's garb and trousers that can be found in the research hall to mix things up further, though I prefer the regular variant. Just as Old Hunter weaponry is generally cruder and less refined than the weapons used by modern day Healing Church hunters, the same can be said for Old Hunter attire. The newer attires each have varying degrees of robustness incorporated into their designs, but they're also rather ostentatious, being just as much about representing and flaunting the particular branch or associated group of the Healing Church that the hunter is associated with. The Old Hunter set on the other hand is far more simple and all the more threatening for it. That's not to say that it's totally lacking in any sort of style, because I think it looks bloody great, but in a slightly shabbier, noticeably more old-fashioned way. It's not too dissimilar to Gascoigne set with its long black coat and wide brim cap, though the headpiece of this set also features stitch-up fabric covering the mouth, perhaps intended to be an archaic measure to prevent sprayed beast blood from finding its way into the nose and mouth. I was originally actually going to put the Yahar'gul Hunter set in here for number 48, but I simply enjoy the flavour of the old hunters too much to leave them unrepresented in my list. Their set is a classic. Oh, come now, come now. You didn't think I was going to leave out the Crucible Knight set now, did you? Of course not, because folks, I love Crucible Knights, and I love their set. In fact, my most commonly used fashion souls is to wear the Crucible Axe armour, gauntlets and greaves with the ever-intimidating Omen Smirk mask. But we're talking pure armour sets here, and so to hell with the mask, get me my helm. Crucible Knights are dotted all over the lands between. They're essentially Elden Ring's version of Black Knights, except instead of being scattered to all corners after the sacrifice of Gwyn, they were left without a leader after the Grace of Gold was taken from Lord Godfrey by Queen Marika prior to his exile. Nailing these knights will get you various rewards, such as aspects of the Crucible incantations and even their Crucible horn shield in the case of the one down in Siofra Aqueduct, which I consider to be the single coolest looking shield in the game by the way, but to get this set, got to take down Ordovis at the end of the Orisis hero's grave. Absolute bastard of a fight too, because he's paired up with a Crucible Tree Knight, which is far from ideal. I love both these enemy types, but let's keep them separate if you please. Winning the fight will get you the Crucible Axe Set though, and also Ordovis' greatsword, which is another favourite of mine. Just look at that Ash of War. As for the Crucible Tree Set, you can get that from a chest behind Siluria down in Deeproot Depths, though it actually shares the same gauntlets and greaves with the Axe Set. And also, for as much as I do like these pieces, my pick does specifically go to the Axe Set. The thing that makes the Crucible Axe Set so uniquely compelling is its association with its namesake, the Crucible. The Lands Between is of course a place fiercely devoted to the Golden Order and the Erdtree, with arboreal designs, motifs and colours visible in many places and on many armour sets. And even the main rival faction in the Lands Between worship a tree, just a different one. The Crucible Knight's presence and appearance harkens back to a time before the Erdtree, when aspects of the Crucible such as horns, wings, tails and scales were considered to be physical manifestations of the divine. However, in the time that Elden Ring is set in, such aspects are considered to be signs of impurity, hence why beings such as the Misbegotten and Omens are shunned, as are these scattered knights, who themselves make use of crucible-based incantations. In fact, wearing pieces of their set actually increases the power of such incantations, and their great shield features an enormous horn. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the armour, however, is the colour, a unique red-tinged gold, said to exemplify the nature of primordial gold, perhaps an even truer gold than the more ostentatious incandescence of the Erdtree. The helm is also a standout part of the ensemble, featuring an extremely distinctive double axe blade design, the mark of Knight Ordovis, perhaps shaped so in tribute to the axe used by Lord Godfrey. Worth noting though that by the time you fight the actual Godfrey at the foot of the Erdtree, his axe has been broken at one side, but when encountered in golden spirit form in the Erdtree Sanctuary, you can see his weapon in its original double-sided glory. What more can I say about the Crucible Axe Set, other than it looks superb? It is interesting, captivating and distinctive in colour, ornamentation and importance to the lore. In fact, it might just be my favourite set in the game. And here we are folks, all the way at number 50. What a ride it's been, and thank you for watching this far into the video. I hope you found it to be a fun time. This last one's going to be a wee bit different though, because instead of just featuring one set here, I'm going to give shoutouts to 3, all from Dark Souls 2 as it happens, with the common element between them being that I did not manage, or if you want to be really uncharitable to me, I did not bother actually acquiring them myself for similar reasons. It's the Black Dragon, Ivory King and Loyce sets, all of which I think are extremely fucking cool. First off, the Black Dragon set. The reason I didn't get this for myself is because the only way to get the full thing is to farm dragon scales, so as to raise your Dragon Remnant's Covenant rank, with 10 being needed for the Dragon Headstone, which transforms your head into the Black Dragon Helm, and then 20 in total being required for the Dragon Torso Stone, which gets you the rest of this transient armour upon it being activated. I could have farmed the Imperfects or the actual Dragon Knights on the Dragon Shrine for these scales, or even tried out some PvP, I guess, but for as much time as I spent farming certain other sets on this list, I honestly just didn't fucking feel like going through all this rigmarole too. 20 dragon scales is a lot of dragon scales, and it seemed like it'd take way too long, and again, I just really didn't want to do it. I'm sorry. Laziness aside though, the Black Dragon set is almost too cool. It's too cool for school. The armour is said to be made from the scales of a legendary Black Dragon, with this clearly referencing Black Dragon Calamite from Dark Souls 1, though slightly confusingly the armour really isn't very, black. Perhaps it's just a trick of the light, but it's clearly coloured a gleaming gold. Don't get me wrong though, I think it looks all the better for it, very fashionably draconic. You were also able to transform into a sort of dragon humanoid back in Dark Souls 1 of course, but famously it looked kinda goofy and shit, and so barely anyone bothered with it, whereas Dark Souls 2 got it precisely right. The other two sets that I didn't get are actually directly connected, those being the Loyce set and of course the Ivory King set. Both of them must be farmed for, big time, down in the old Chaos where the Burnt Ivory King boss fight takes place. A big battle between you and any Loyce Knights you've freed, and a whole bunch of Burnt Loyce Knights before the Burnt Ivory King himself shows up to the party. These Burnt Loyce Knights actually drop pieces of their own armour, and it really didn't take all that long for me to get their full set. Looks pretty decent with the way it appears so thoroughly burnt and blackened by the flames of chaos, but compared to the regular unburnt Loyce set, nowhere near as cool. It looks incredible with one of the all-time coolest Soulsborne helms. The issue, however, is getting the damn armour, cause for that you need Loyce souls, with 5 being needed before Alsana will give you the gauntlets and leggings, 15 before you will get the main armour piece, and 35 in total if you want that awesome helmet. Now, if 35 Loyce souls sounds like a lot, that's because it is a lot, especially when you take into consideration how stupidly low the drop rate is. I was down here with the Jester's Cap, the gold covetous serpent ring, and the Watch Dragon Parma equipped, and I was even popping rusted coins to increase my luck further, and they were still so rare in dropping. It was pretty outrageous actually. I should write a letter of complaint. Also, if you've already beaten the Burnt Ivory King, it is significantly harder to farm for Loyce souls, because now you don't have the help of the unburnt Loyce Knights, and the burnt ones now spawn in much more slowly. I love the Loyce set, and I really do think it's one of the best looking armour sets that FromSoft have ever designed, but sadly I've never been able to actually wear it myself, and probably never will. I can tolerate some farming, clearly. I've spent a whole bunch of hours doing it for the other sets, but this was just a bridge too far for moi. But believe it or not, it's even bloody worse for the Ivory King set. Usually with boss armour, it's just a case of purchasing them from either Morne or Magarold after that boss has been defeated. Can be expensive as hell, but yeah, that's because they tend to look cool as shit, so it's worth it. As it happens, Morne actually does sell the Ivory King set. The catch is that you need to have harvested 50, yes, 50 Loyce souls before he has it in stock. No. Damn shame too, because I also happen to think it's up there as one of FromSoft's absolute coolest, but alas, I'll have to be satisfied with merely admiring it in the heat of battle, rather than being able to do the slow, circular cinematic panning effect thing that I've done for every other fucking set. And there you have it folks, there is my list. I know there were a few of you who might have wanted me to straight up rank every armour set like I've done with levels and bosses, but sorry, that's just not going to happen. There are simply way too many. But I did like the idea of picking out and discussing a whole bunch of what I thought were the coolest of the cool, and 50 seemed like the perfect number. I know there were some much loved sets that I did not include, like Malekith's, Radahn's, the Crow Feather Garb and Lorien sets, etc, but, you know, tough shit. Make your own fucking list. And on that pleasant note, please allow me to give another massive thank you to my splendid patrons for supporting the channel. And with all that being said, cheers for watching and cheerio.